In the sprawling urban jungle of Chicago, 1987, where neon lights cast long shadows and ambition fueled a decade of excess, a criminal enterprise unlike any other took root in the city's forgotten corners. This is Shadow City Syndicate. This is the American Sin File, justice drawn. Every criminal enterprise has its architect. For the Shadow City Syndicate, that man was Victor Reeves. Born to working-class parents in South Chicago, Reeves was no stranger to hardship. His father, a laid-off steel worker, turned to the bottle. His mother worked double shifts at the local diner just to keep food on the table. In a city defined by its neighborhoods, Reeves was forgotten by all but those who called it home. By 17, Reeves had already spent time in juvenile detention for running numbers and small-time hustles. But those years weren't wasted. They were an education. Where others saw incarceration, Victor Reeves saw a networking opportunity. But every criminal mastermind needs a right hand. For Reeves, that person was Elaine Winters. Winters wasn't your typical criminal. A graduate of Northwestern with a degree in business administration, she had a legitimate future ahead of her. But in the recession-hit 80s, Wall Street wasn't hiring women from her neighborhood. Their loss became Reeves' gain. Winters brought something invaluable to the table: financial acumen. While other criminal operations dealt in cash stuffed in mattresses, the Shadow City Syndicate operated with the precision of a Fortune 500 company, and Elaine was its CFO. Every operation needs muscle, and the Shadow City Syndicate found theirs in the unlikely form of the Thompson brothers, Dean and Marcus. Former high school wrestling champions from the suburbs, the Thompsons drifted into the city's underground fighting circuit after their college scholarships fell through. That's where Reeves spotted them, not just for their brute strength, but for their discipline. The brothers weren't common thugs. They were tacticians who understood that violence was a currency best spent sparingly. Their reputation alone was often enough to ensure compliance. But perhaps most crucial to the syndicate's success was their inside man, Detective Samuel Hayes of the Chicago PD. Hayes had started his career as an idealist, a true believer in the system. 15 years of witnessing criminals walk on technicalities and watching corrupt officials climb the ranks had changed him. By the time Reeves approached him with an offer, Hayes had already convinced himself that the system was broken beyond repair. For a cut of the profits, Detective Hayes provided intelligence on police operations, redirected investigations, and occasionally made evidence disappear. In a department plagued by corruption, Hayes was careful never to stand out, neither as particularly honest nor notably corrupt. The Shadow City Syndicate wasn't formed overnight. It grew methodically, territory by territory, operation by operation. Its foundation was laid in Chicago's warehouse district, a maze of abandoned industrial spaces perfect for storing contraband. What began as a simple operation moving stolen electronics across state lines soon expanded into something more sophisticated. By 1985, the syndicate had diversified. They weren't just stealing and fencing goods anymore. They were falsifying shipping manifests, creating shell companies, and establishing a complex network of distribution channels that spanned the Midwest. The operation's sophistication was Elaine Winters' contribution. She established legitimate front businesses, a chain of laundromats, several convenience stores, and even a small trucking company, all perfect for laundering money and moving merchandise. These businesses served another purpose. They employed locals from neighborhoods struggling with double-digit unemployment. In communities forgotten by politicians and ignored by legitimate businesses, the syndicate became an unlikely economic lifeline. This wasn't charity, it was strategy. By providing jobs and occasional community support, the syndicate bought something more valuable than any merchandise: loyalty and silence. The Thompson brothers oversaw the syndicate's expansion into neighboring territories. Unlike the violence that characterized many criminal takeovers, their approach was more corporate than confrontational. They would approach rival operations with a simple proposition: join the syndicate as franchise operators or face economic strangulation. Most chose the former, recognizing the superior infrastructure and protection the syndicate offered. For those who refused, the Thompsons designed escalating pressure campaigns. First came economic competition, then strategic sabotage of supply lines, and only as a last resort, targeted displays of force. Detective Hayes proved invaluable in the syndicate's growth phase. Beyond providing intelligence on police activities, he helped identify corrupt officials who could be bribed and honest ones who needed to be avoided. He also served as an early warning system for federal investigations, which became increasingly frequent as the syndicate's operations grew in scale and sophistication. Perhaps most crucially, Hayes maintained a database of potential competitors and threats, complete with their vulnerabilities and pressure points. This intelligence allowed the syndicate to neutralize threats before they materialized. By 1987, the Shadow City Syndicate had established a criminal empire that generated millions in annual profits, with tentacles reaching into legitimate businesses, local politics, and law enforcement. But Victor Reeves wasn't satisfied. He had his sights set on an operation so audacious that it would either cement the syndicate's place in criminal history or bring the entire enterprise crashing down. The target: Chicago's thriving commodities exchange. The plan was elegantly simple in concept, fiendishly complex in execution. The syndicate would manipulate the pork belly futures market through a combination of insider trading, strategic purchases, and artificial supply constraints. Elaine Winters had identified a key vulnerability. Several major meat processing plants relied on a single refrigeration component supplier. If that supply chain were disrupted, prices would skyrocket. Meanwhile, the syndicate would establish shell companies to make strategic investments, positioned to profit massively from the coming price spike. The execution required precision timing and coordination across multiple fronts. First, the Thompson brothers orchestrated a series of accidents at key refrigeration component manufacturing facilities. Nothing as obvious as arson, but rather carefully planned equipment failures and labor disputes that would significantly reduce supply. Next, Hayes leveraged his police connections to initiate safety inspections at strategic meat storage warehouses, temporarily taking millions of pounds of product off the market during critical trading days. Finally, Winters activated their network of shell companies and proxy investors to take positions that would capitalize on the coming market chaos. The scheme worked perfectly. For 3 days, pork belly futures surged 340% as panic spread through the market. The syndicate's shell companies reaped millions in profits as their competitors scrambled to understand what was happening. But success bred carelessness. One of the proxy investors, seeing the unprecedented returns, broke protocol and withdrew his profits too quickly, creating a paper trail that caught the attention of market regulators. Simultaneously, an honest commodities enforcement officer noticed the statistical anomaly and began pulling threads that would eventually unravel the entire operation. The investigation began quietly, a routine inquiry into unusual market activity. But as federal agents dug deeper, they uncovered a web of shell companies, suspicious transactions, and market manipulation that pointed to an organized criminal enterprise. What the investigators didn't know was that Detective Hayes had friends in the federal building. A casual mention of a commodities investigation was all it took to set off alarm bells within the syndicate. Reeves immediately implemented their contingency plan. Records were shredded, digital trails erased, and assets liquidated and moved offshore. The legitimate businesses were quickly sold off to unsuspecting buyers, while warehouses of evidence were emptied overnight. The Thompsons oversaw the physical dismantling of the operation, working tirelessly to remove any trace of the syndicate's activities. Meanwhile, Winters executed the financial escape plan, moving millions through a labyrinth of accounts that spanned multiple countries. But the federal investigation was moving faster than anticipated. Hayes's sources reported that search warrants were being prepared and arrests were imminent. The syndicate members faced a critical decision: flee separately with their individual shares, or attempt one final operation to secure their collective future. In what would prove to be his final strategic error, Reeves chose the latter. He proposed a daring heist of bearer bonds from a secure financial institution, untraceable assets that would fund their new lives abroad. The heist was meticulously planned but rushed in execution. The team had worked together for years, but never under this kind of pressure. The initial breach went smoothly. Security systems were bypassed. Guards were subdued without violence, and the vault was accessed right on schedule. But as they were securing the bonds, the unexpected happened. A silent alarm, unknown even to Hayes's police contacts, had been triggered. When the team emerged from the vault, they found themselves surrounded by federal agents and SWAT team members. What followed wasn't the shootout depicted in later media accounts. The syndicate members, pragmatic to the end, surrendered without resistance. The Thompson brothers were the first to drop their weapons, followed quickly by the rest. Only Reeves seemed reluctant to accept defeat, standing motionless, bearer bonds still clutched in his hand as federal agents closed in from all sides. In that moment, witnesses would later testify, he looked not angry or frightened, but almost relieved, as if the weight of the empire he'd built had finally been lifted from his shoulders. The trials that followed captured national attention. Prosecutors painted the Shadow City Syndicate as a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had infiltrated Chicago's economic and political infrastructure. The defense portrayed them as entrepreneurial outsiders who had found opportunity in systems that had failed their communities. Both narratives contained elements of truth. Victor Reeves received the harshest sentence, 24 years for racketeering, market manipulation, and financial fraud. He would serve 18 before being released in 2005 to a world that had largely forgotten him. Elaine Winters cooperated with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence of 10 years. Her testimony was crucial in securing convictions against several corrupt officials who had facilitated the syndicate's operations. The Thompson brothers, facing the prospect of decades behind bars, accepted plea deals that required them to dismantle what remained of the syndicate's network. They served 7 years each before being released into witness protection. Detective Hayes managed to evade prosecution initially, but as more evidence emerged from cooperating witnesses, he was eventually indicted. Rather than face trial, he fled the country. Unconfirmed reports placed him in various Central American countries throughout the 1990s, but his ultimate fate remains unknown. The dismantling of the Shadow City Syndicate left a power vacuum in Chicago's criminal underworld that would spark violent territorial disputes throughout the early 1990s. The sophisticated infrastructure they had built was quickly repurposed by rival organizations, none of which achieved the same level of efficiency or reach. Perhaps the most lasting impact of the syndicate case was its influence on financial regulations. The ease with which they had manipulated commodity markets led to significant reforms in trading oversight and transparency requirements. The communities that had benefited from the syndicate's economic activities suffered in their absence. The legitimate front businesses were sold off or shuttered, taking with them jobs and services that weren't replaced for nearly a decade. As for the millions allegedly hidden by the syndicate before their fall, most remains unrecovered. Federal agents managed to seize assets worth approximately $14 million, but financial analysts estimated their total holdings at closer to $50 million. Rumors persist of cash caches hidden throughout Chicago and bank accounts in countries with strict secrecy laws. Every few years, someone claims to have discovered the syndicate's lost fortune, but none of these claims has ever been verified. The Shadow City Syndicate operated for less than a decade, but their impact on Chicago's economic and criminal landscape lasted for generations. They represented a new breed of criminal enterprise, one that blended traditional racketeering with sophisticated financial manipulation and corporate structure. Their story serves as a case study in criminal innovation and the dangers of regulatory blind spots, but it also raises uncomfortable questions about economic opportunity and community support in forgotten neighborhoods. In the end, what made the syndicate unique wasn't just their criminal ingenuity, but their understanding that true power comes not from violence or fear, but from becoming essential to the communities you serve. For the American Sin File, Justice Drawn, this is case number 47, Shadow City Syndicate.